Most people have an irrational love and attachment to their state, even though it's probably just average. Personally, I wouldn't know anything about that though, because I live in the best state, Indiana, also known as God's country, and obviously Texas is a close second. I'd love to hear what you think the third best state is in the comments. This project is a great way for people to display that pride in their home. I've been making, gifting, and selling these state signs for a couple years now. They're quick and relatively easy once you have a template for the state outline. A quick word of warning though, the difficulty level here can vary significantly depending on what state you're trying to make. Do you live in Colorado? You're good. Hawaii? Maybe check out a different project. This build starts, as many do, as a humble cedar fence picket. You can use other types of wood too if you'd like. I generally build these around 15 inches by 13 inches. So the build takes about 250 square inches of material once you account for the trim. But really, these can be any size you like. You can go bigger, smaller, it's up to you. The toughest part is getting a template of the right size so you can put that on your piece. So I'll be building off a cedar fence picket. I'm going to start by sanding it down with 120 grit sandpaper. This will knock down the roughest spots, and then I'll come back with 240 grit to clean it up even more. We will sand it again later, so don't feel like you have to get it perfect at this point. It's just a bit easier to do when it's still all in one piece. Next, choose the dimensions you'll want the final build to be. I'm making this one of Ohio for a friend. I'm building it at 15 by 13 inches for now, but I'll trim that down to the final dimensions later. So I'm cutting pickets at 15 inches long to ensure I have a little buffer when I go to make the piece later. The standard cedar picket width is 5¼ inches. That means to get to the 13-inch width, I'll need to glue 3 of them together. So once I have my 3 15-inch boards, I'll head over to the table saw. At the table saw, we're going to square up the edges as best as possible. Whenever I make cuts to glue up boards, I always check the angle of my table saw blade against the tabletop with my digital angle finder, just to be sure it's very square. This will help your final product immensely, so I definitely recommend picking one up if you don't already have one. They're very cheap too. Link is in the description if you're looking for one. Trim one edge on each board using this level jointing trick, then clean up the other edge. Now we're ready to glue, so go grab your clamps. I use Titebond 3 for pretty much everything at this point, but really any wood glue will work. Get the boards as flat as you can and clamp them up. Let that dry overnight. While that is drying, we can work on our state template. There are several ways of doing this. The most commonly available way would be to find an outline of the state online and print it at home. This is pretty easy, but we'll limit the size to about 10½ by 8 inches if you're just using a standard sheet of paper. This is the method I started with until I got a laser etcher. The one I own is linked in the description if you'd like to check it out. Using the laser etcher, I can make a much larger template on a piece of cardboard, or even etch it directly onto the surface of the board. Now that you have the outline, it's time to start cutting. We want to remove the center and leave the outside frame. So I started by drilling a large hole that I can get my jigsaw blade into. I try to put this by a long straight edge on the state if there is one. I can then cut away the bulk of the material with just the jigsaw. Once I have the bulk removed, I like to move to the router table. A lot of states have a border that is a river, so the edges can be wavy and tough to cut with a jigsaw. Using a straight cut bit, finish cutting up to the template line. Once that is all done, give the piece another light sanding to ensure the outline is completely removed. Next, trim the board to the desired size of the final piece. Remember that we're going to be adding a 1-inch piece of trim around the outside when making your decision on size. Use the table saw to get clean parallel cuts. Let's add the trim to the front face now. This is just a standard 45-degree miter that will match the lengths of the sides. Start with 2 opposite sides. Once those are secured in place, measure and slowly approach the perfect length needed to get the miters just right. Glue, clamp, and nail those pieces down. An important note for nailing though. Keep in mind how you want these to hang or be displayed. I always avoid putting nails near the top center of the piece because that's where my hanging hardware is likely to go. The final steps are open to you for some creative freedom. The first decision to make is how these will hang or be displayed. My favorite option here is to use the router table to add a keyhole in the back of the trim. It just takes a few minutes, gives a professional feel to the piece, and allows it to hang flush against a wall. You could also go with standard picture hangers if you'd like. Finally, add any finish you want. This can be paint, stain, poly, or nothing at all. I wiped this one down with Danish oil to deepen the natural red of the cedar. So that's really all there is to this build. I've given many of these as gifts. I've also sold them in about the $25 range. And another cool thing to keep in mind is this doesn't have to be states. If you can make the template, you can cut whatever you want out. I see a lot of opportunity here, especially around Christmas. So modify this build to fit the season you're in or coming up to. I hope this content was helpful for you. If so, be sure to subscribe to not miss out on any new builds. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.